Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome back. Let's just dig right into it. This is part one of who is the best welterweight in the world at 147 pounds. And let's just go into it. Now, Tony Perez says the truth. Errol Spence Jr. is the best welterweight in the world. And, after the display against Mikey Garcia, a lot of people are feeling like Errol Spence Jr. is the best welterweight in the world. I personally disagree. I think Errol Spence Jr. is a very great fighter. I think he's probably number 2 at the welterweight division. I think number 1, I still put Terence Crawford because, I don't rate a win against Mikey Garcia as making him the best in any division or pound for pounds. I do give him credit that he did win the fight and he won it convincingly without any issues or problems, but I just don't like the fact that he was unable to stop or even knock down a guy from 135 pounds. And I also don't like the fact that, when a guy's moving up 2 divisions in weight, he's doing what he's supposed to do. He was a heavy favorite for a reason. So I don't give Errol Spence Jr. the top level credit for that to do anything for his legacy, pound for pound status, or ranking. So I have to be honest and unbiased in that. Let's keep going. Junior Estrella says Crawford because of his skills, and he cleaned out 140. I agree 100%. The fact that Terence Bud Crawford was undisputed at 140 pounds, the fact that Terence Crawford has elite level skills, he can switch from orthodox to southpaw. We see Terence Crawford make adjustments. Unlike Mikey Garcia, Terence Crawford is naturally strong and big enough for the welterweight division. He stopped 2 very big welterweights. And also Terence Crawford power has translated, his skill set has translated and transcended weight classes. Terence Crawford is a more proven version of Mikey Garcia, especially at 147 and 140 pounds. Terence Crawford just seems to be on another level. And when I look at Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr., I see a lot of openings and different types of maneuvers that Terence Crawford would be able to accomplish against an Errol Spence Jr. And there's a reason why Errol Spence Jr. is not mentioning Terence Crawford. And that's a reason why Errol Spence Jr. is not interested in fighting Terence Bud Crawford. And so let's keep going. Pablo Juan says, it's funny because IBFP and all these people in these comments know it's Errol Spence. Now, I don't understand how we know it's Errol Spence Jr. I mean, he's never cleaned out a division. He's never won in multiple divisions. And he beat a small Mikey Garcia and couldn't even knock him out. I don't understand how Errol Spence is number 1 in the welterweight division from beating Mikey Garcia, who is not even a welterweight. But let's just be honest and unbiased. Pablo. Let's keep going. 651 Bam Bam says Terence Bud Crawford. I agree. I do have Errol Spence number 2. I have Crawford 1. I have Errol Spence number 2. I have Yordini's Ugas number 3. I have Keith One Time Thurman number 4. And I have Sean Showtime Porter number 5. Okay, let's keep going. Juan Holguin says Bud Crawford followed by Pac-Man, then Spence. I can put Terence Bud Crawford at the top. I personally wouldn't put Pac-Man at number 2 since he's much older, past his prime. But Pac-Man can still crack. Pac-Man is a threat for anyone at the welterweight division. But I would put Errol Spence slightly above, Manny Pacquiao at this point, me personally. But I'd put Bud Crawford at the top. I think Errol Spence is just too young, too fresh, too big, too strong for Manny Pacquiao at this point in his career. Bernie Sanders states, Bud, MF, and Crawford, sick that dog on that effing dorky prostitute Spence. Now, I will say this. I think Terence Crawford would be too much for Errol Spence. I think he has too many abilities, too many adjustments he can make, too many skills. And I just have to lean towards Terence Crawford. I think Terence Crawford is the actual truth of 147 pounds. But that doesn't mean Spence couldn't win. I think that'll be a very close fight. And I'll say a 60-40 fight in Terence Crawford's favor. Let's keep going. AB states, as well as Spence did against Mikey, I still think Crawford is a better boxer, puncher. Spence went 12 rounds with the lightweight and couldn't knock him out. I believe Crawford would have gotten the job done in no more than 46 rounds. I agree. I think, looking at what Errol Spence Jr. did, if it was Terence Bud Crawford, I think Terence Crawford would have stopped Mikey between 6 to 8 rounds. I think that Mikey Garcia is just not meant to be at a welterweight. Let's keep going. Sergio Morafo says Terence Crawford. I agree. Brett says Terence Crawford. I agree. Emmanuel Moreno says Errol Spence, although Crawford looks like he could really give Spence problems after this underwhelming performance by Errol. I think, I can kind of agree with you, Emmanuel. Even if you have Errol Spence Jr. number 1, I'll give you some credit for acknowledging that, Terence Crawford would give Errol Spence Jr. a much more difficult fight than he's ever experienced, and way more problems than Mikey Garcia physically is able to give. Sal Benitez says Spence, Crawford, Pacquiao in that order. I wouldn't rate Pacquiao so highly because he's past his prime, because Pacquiao has already been stopped in his career, and because Pacquiao is not ready for this type of fight at this point in his career. If this was prime Pacquiao, I'd put him there, but he's not. And we'll keep going. True Story states, I have Bud Crawford at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I respect that, True Story, and I have to pick Crawford there as well. I just believe Crawford is the best man at 147 pounds. He's the most proven guy at 147 pounds. He's the most avoided, ducked, and feared fighter. He's the true boogeyman at 147 pounds. Logical Sense states Spence or Crawford, we don't know unless they fight each other. We must see the fight, but Errol Spence Jr. is not interested in making that fight. He told Terence Crawford to his face that he'd take the easy route. When asked about Terence Crawford, he said no and left the podium in his post-fight with Mikey Garcia. He's not interested in talking about Terence Crawford. He don't want to see the truth. Look, Chris Girl states Crawford is the truth, Spence is a lie. And I have to agree with that. I think Errol Spence Jr. is a very good fighter. He has a chance to beat Terence Crawford if he uses his size and power effectively. He's already proven me wrong once with his boxing ability, but I think that Terence Crawford is just levels above most fighters, even Errol Spence Jr. in boxing ability. He's proven it. He's cleaned out divisions, and he's no Mikey Garcia by a long shot. LA 12 says Keith Thurman went in good shape and not like his last fight in Josecito. I agree. Keith Thurman could be the best welterweight if it wasn't for, being in that such poor conditioning and shape. Keith Thurman almost got stopped by Josecito, I believe, in the 7th round. And the fact that Josecito, Keith Thurman just looked horrible conditioning wise. He looked great early on and he faded as the fight went on. I think that Keith Thurman must get multiple tune-ups, get himself back in the right order so he can compete against the Errol Spence, Terence Crawford, and he has to take and make those big fights. Let's keep going. Fernando Meza says Crawford or Spence. I can respect that, the top two guys. IMO says, sure the F ain't Spence. It has to be Bud. I agree 100%. I just don't think Spence has done enough, and I'm not rating this Mikey Garcia win because he's not a natural welterweight. He's not a guy that fights at welterweight. It was a one-off fight, and you couldn't credit Spence with this win. Only person that could have been credited was Garcia. Not because I like Mikey Garcia or like Errol Spence, is because Mikey Garcia is moving up 2 weight divisions to fight a guy at 147. How can you rate that as a solid win to move Errol Spence Jr. up in the 147 rankings? You can't. Isaac Ruiz 92 says definitely Bud, and I can definitely respect that. I see Bud Crawford as well, and it's hard to go against that. Let's keep going. Gentle Uprising says nobody gave Lomachenko any credit after he beat Rigo. Why should I give Spence credit for beating a smaller fighter? I agree 100%. I don't give Vasily Lomachenko any credit for beating Guillermo Rigo, just like I can't give Errol Spence Jr. any credit for beating a Mikey Garcia. That makes no sense. You don't get credit for doing what you're supposed to do against much smaller fighters. Now, at the end of the day, if Errol Spence Jr. does that against Terence Crawford or Keith Thurman or Yordenis Ugas, then I'll give Errol Spence Jr. all the credit in the world and say, hey, this guy's the best at 147. He is the truth. But until that day comes, he's not. He's the most unproven in that regard, and I would have to give the edge to Terence Bud Crawford. Big L said Bud and Spence have to fight to find out. Nobody else is on their level. I think Keith Thurman can be if he's 100%. The problem with that is we don't know if Keith Thurman will ever be 100%. And we have to see Keith Thurman in another big fight. We have to see Keith Thurman get a few more tune-ups because Keith Thurman desperately needs that work. Samuel Quierton says Terence Crawford. The Bearded Texan says definitely not Spence after not being able to knock out or even black the eye of little Mikey. And this is coming from a guy that doesn't like Mexican boxer. That's very interesting. Now, I just don't think that when you're not able to stop Mikey, a guy from a naturally 135 pounds, that's a huge problem when you're fighting at the welterweight division against bigger, stronger guys. It's funny that Errol Spence Jr. said Terence Crawford needed to prove himself at 147. He said that he's looking to take the easy route when he mentioned Crawford. Then he says he's definitely not fighting on ESPN. It's just a lot of excuses from Errol Spence Jr., a supposed free agent, a supposed guy who's his own boss. He has to fight Terence Crawford because right now he looks like a complete duck. But once again, unbiased as always, it's the IBFP. This concludes part 1 of who's the best welterweight on the planet. Please share, like, and you must absolutely subscribe.